Last year, on the 12th of September 2019, gender activists and concerned parties led a march to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange in Sandton to highlight business responsibility in the fight against gender-based violence. Newzroom Afrika's Malungelo Boy filed this report.
A woman's clothes smeared with paint, a child's nappy, and a coffin. This is a mock crime scene symbolizing how women and children are currently being treated. Hundreds gathered in front of Africa's oldest and largest stock exchange. That's as the country continues to battle with the scourge of gender-based violence.
Represents all the evil things that are being done by men.
Yes.
The dress there represents a lady who was killed 7 years back.
Yeah.
In the Val Triangle by 5 men. She was a domestic worker.
Okay.
And also here, the raping of children, infants, all the evil things.
Yeah.
Then here it's all the girls that are and the women that are have been died because of gender-based violence.
Nomasonto Limako says she's here to raise awareness about the challenges faced by women living with disabilities.
As a woman with disability, I have to break the silence of abuse. I have to break the silence of rape. I have to break the silence of gender justice. We've got many women with disabilities who are suffering, who are being abused, who are being violated at their home by their family members and everything, but they don't go to the police station because they know that in police station, when you go there, they will be saying to you, how you were having fun, most, why are you coming to report? They were doing you a favor.
Protesters who descended on the JSE from 3 in the morning are calling for urgent action by government and business. Many say the situation is a gross violation of human rights.
There is a reason why we are here in Sandton. It's one of the country's biggest economic hubs, Africa's biggest economic hub. It's not by mistake, comrades. We believe that the business sector has much to answer for the levels of gender-based violence in the country. We want them to fund the fight. Comrades, we want them to fund the fight.
Newton King says she doesn't agree that business isn't doing enough.
I really don't think business is complacent, but I would say that the particular focus on gender-based violence has got business looking at, and that's my use of the word introspection, looking at whether or not there is more that we can do, because you must appreciate that all businesses look at what they do and allocate their resources based on what they perceive at the time the urgencies to be. And as things come up, and that's why it's so important and so actually awesome to have women's voice heard in this manner. As these voices get raised, so one can start to pivot focus towards how one might address those in a sustainable manner.
Protests and business leaders are expected to meet next Friday over the matter. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Malungelo Boy in Sandton.
Okay, so 1 year later, has the private sector come on board by availing resources rather than proposing once-off solutions when it comes to the corporate social responsibility budget? To speak to us more about the actions that have taken place post #Sandton shutdown, we're joined by development economist and anti-GBV strategist Phelisa Nkomo. Phelisa, thank you for your time and thank you for joining me on Weekend Dawn. What was the initial objective of the march that took place on the 12th of September 2019?
Thank you very much, and thank you to the listeners this morning who are actually watching. Well, I mean, the key objective, I think the first issue is that the gender-based violence activists and feminists who converge on that chilly morning to come to bring in a memorandum to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the central message they were sending is that business or corporate sector is part of society. So in essence, anything that happens to society, they need to take interest in. but in particular in this context, that women who in fact suffer and go through the subjected to the oppressive nature of the patriarchal system in South Africa, is that in fact they are actually under siege as a result. They are unable to walk at night, for instance. They feel unsafe, within their own homes. Children in particular are even more vulnerable, right? They're subjected into so much violence. So the central message was to them say that corporate South Africa, you need to be concerned with what's happening in communities, because in fact, for corporate South Africa to run a thriving business and a thriving economy, is that actually you need consumers who are not only productive, but also are able to consume your products or your services in a safe environment. So four critical things we're raising on that day was that firstly, we are aware that there's still a serious gender pay gap within the corporate sector, and it's important that corporate sector actually begin to deal with it, because one or another, it does actually re-entrench the whole second-class component of women in society, and that by design, it actually re-entrench again that patriarchal system which gives privileges to men, that women have actually add no value in the system. The second component was really about we need actually corporate sector to deal with the issue of pervasive sexual harassment in the workplace. We have well-known cases of women who have been subjected to sexual harassment, but who just disappear and we never know exactly what's happening, because there is no established system that is supportive to them to be able to take up the cases of sexual harassment. Instead, they get victimized, but at the same time is that even the witnesses who have seen sexual harassment just disappear and never want to operate or support women. I think the third issue was around the issue of ceiling. We've seen, for example, where women actually take up positions of power in the corporate sector, and in fact, you never see them moving beyond any other point besides being stuck at an exco level, and their voices are never heard. The fourth issue was around private sector as part of their strategic, recognition of the impact of gender-based violence in South Africa, which it's part of what we call social instability in society, that they need to contribute in the gender-based violence fund as a sign. We understand the contribution they're making in as far as corporate social responsibility, but we think that because this one is fundamentally embedded within the social and political and economic system of South Africa, is that they need to contribute financially to gender-based violence, which supports, I had in your clip earlier, women's organizations, because it's women who've been standing up, who have actually been saying enough is enough. And women were doing the right thing, because in any case, it's women who are actually oppressed, who experience gender-based violence, who are scared of moving around, but also who are scared of taking a taxi at public transport. Other issues, for example, which are actually never addressed in the workplace, for instance, is the fact that you have sectors that are dominated by women, but those sectors don't provide transport after work at night for women. So that's another demand that we're making. The other one is that we need to create safe spaces for handling gender-based violence. For instance, you'd know that New Zealand has just passed now a law which recognizes and allows those who have been survivors of gender-based violence a 10-day leave, a paid 10-day leave. Now, in our system, for example, we actually don't have that unless you have to go and to a doctor and present a certificate, even if there's sufficient evidence that shows that you've been subjected into a gender-based violence. But also profoundly, we're saying that corporate South Africa needs to create a patriarchal-free, work environment where women's voices are heard, but women also, there's a much more investment for women to take up leadership position. We know, for example, that corporate South Africa, from a decision-making perspective...
Phelisa, I'd like to just come in there. Phelisa, I just want to find out, that's the last time you marched on the 12th of September 2019. Are they coming to the party?
Yes, they are coming to the party. There's a steering committee that has been established that interacts with the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and the GBV activities. About eight of us are one of that steering committee. So one of the key things we said to them, we need, for example, a regulation regime within the private sector that looks at, for example, the listing, that the criteria for listing, in the same way, for example, there's the criteria for listing that says you need to comply with corporate governance, you need to make sure that you have women in your board, you make sure that your statements, your financial statements have been audited, and that you implement transparent systems in how you do your business. We would like, for instance, that part of the listing that companies must be able to indicate their spending and the things they're doing in relation to gender-based violence. So we've had that discussion and we've put up the package. Look, unfortunately, is that the COVID-19 hit as we're starting the conversation. And of course, that process has not been without challenges. And let me highlight, for instance, I think one of the key issues is that corporate South Africa was not convinced that they needed to consider this as part of the listing. But at the time where we had our previous discussion, there was a bit of an understanding, not a consensus, but a bit of understanding that we had legitimate demands in terms of what we were asking for. The second issue, they were not sure about the 2% levy. How are they going to be able to collect it administratively, and what does it mean to them, or whether it will not add an additional burden. But I mean, for us, we're saying we're open to have a conversation. In fact, we have ideas in terms of how should that be done. I think the third issue that, in fact, we think, of course, from our side, we know that, a civil society organization, but total shutdown, including other civil society organizations who are actually active in this space, are also constrained as well with their own, for example, internal capacity, because this work does require a lot of research. For example, you need to assemble teams of economists, financial analysts, to look at the annual reports of private sector companies, to look at how much are they committing in terms of the gender-based violence, for example, both in terms of
Phelisa,
the finance.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it right there. We are running out of time. From what I pick up from this is slow progress is happening, and there was a mission with the Sandton shutdown protest, and it seems to be yielding results. But corporate South Africa could actually do a lot better. Thank you for chatting to us. We really appreciate it. Wish we could actually chat some more about this, but we'll of course check in on that, on the update on the Sandton shutdown. If you remember, they marched to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange on the 12th of September last year, looking for change and looking for women to be well represented within a corporate space. That was the development economist and anti-GBV strategist giving us an update on the Sandton shutdown 1 year later. A big thank you once more to Phelisa Nkomo.